The Sikh religion or faith tradition begins in the early 16th century with Nanak, referred to as Guru Nanak by his followers. Guru Nanak's compositions are the foundation of the Sikh sacred text, the Guru Granth Sahib, initially compiled in 1604 by the 5th Sikh Guru, Arjan. The Guru Granth Sahib contains verses of 5 of Guru Nanak's successors, compositions of more than 25 other authors, mostly Bhagats and Bhatts, or hereditary bards, and 2 Sufi poets, and was finalized in the late 17th century. The vocabulary of the Guru Granth Sahib comes largely from the contemporary languages of the peoples of northwestern India, going back to Apranj, Prakrit, and Sanskrit, precursors of modern Punjabi. A large number of words from Persian and Arabic have also been adopted. In this video, we provide a brief introduction to old and new forms of Sikh literature of the 18th century. The emergence of new forms of literature is a reflection of historical change and the new needs of the community. This literature is built on the lives of the Sikh Gurus, their spiritual message, the role of the Khalsa, the Sikh way of life, and the struggles of the Sikh community against the imperial authorities. It constructs narratives of the history of the tradition along with interpretations of Sikhi's meaning and significance for the world in which the authors lived. Indeed, these narratives continue to have significance for the contemporary Sikh community. Of all the folk literary forms, the Vaar is the most popular. The Guru Granth Sahib contains 22 Vaars. It is one of the longer verse forms and is traditionally a heroic ballad, used in the Guru Granth Sahib to convey spiritual themes. Bhai Gurdas, a contemporary of Guru Arjan, also used the Vaar as a literary form to delineate and document the nascent, expanding Sikh community and to amplify the Sikh Guru's spiritual message. One of the best-known Vaars in Sikh literature is Chandedi Vaar, which mythologizes the heroic triumph of good over evil. It is composed in Punjabi and generally attributed to Guru Gobind Singh himself. Its opening body, literally step, but meaning a stanza in this context, starts with Pritam Pagati Simarke, which now forms the beginning of the Sikh Ardas, or prayer, which is recited at every worship occasion and invokes the supreme divine power, as well as the 9 Gurus preceding Guru Gobind Singh. Gurdas Singh, a poet in Guru Gobind Singh's court, composed another significant Vaar, Vaar Pagati, which praises Guru Gobind Singh and the Khalsa, their heroism, and their spiritual merit, both being 2 sides of the same coin. Other Sikh Vaars from 18th century offer similar heroic themes based on this dual character of the Khalsa, combining the spiritual with the heroic. Saakhi literally means witness and, in the Sikh tradition, is associated with the stories of the lives of the Gurus or Janam Saakhis. The Sikh Janam Saakhis are episodic narratives of the lives of the Gurus, especially Guru Nanak in earlier compositions. They are typically in prose, but with verse selections from the Guru Granth Sahib or its predecessor, the Adi Granth. The oldest Janam Saakhis date to the late 16th century, and the genre became increasingly popular in the 17th century. In the 18th century, the Saakhi form is used for the lives of all the Gurus, and Guru Gobind Singh is featured most prominently. By the 18th century, the older Janam Saakhis also acquire material from multiple sources, creating new compilations of the Saakhis. A variety of such Saakhi compilations provide details of Sikh life in the 17th and 18th centuries, along with historical information about the Sikh Gurus, as well as rivals from within the Sodhi families, such as Tirmal and Ram Rai. Unlike Saakhis, which are episodic, the Gurbilas was a new form of literature which emerged in the 18th century and has an overarching narrative structure typically around the life of Guru Gobind Singh. The first work in this genre is Senapat's Sri Gur Shobha, which was completed in about 1708 CE and has the earliest account of the creation of the Khalsa. The account of Guru Gobind Singh's life is combined with an explication of his mission of saving humanity. In this endeavor, Senapat draws on the Bachitr Natak attributed to the 10th Guru, which traces the Guru's mission to Guru Nanak. The Gurbilas of Kuber Singh dated to 1751 CE and Sukha Singh dated to 1797 CE follow a similar pattern to celebrate the life and mission of Guru Gobind Singh. The Bachitr Natak and Senapat's Gursobha serve as their sources along with Sikh oral tradition. However, there are differences in the sequence of events and also in detail. Sukha Singh seems to have made a more judicious use of his news sources. Writing at a time when Sikh rule was firmly established, Sukha Singh does not talk of the struggle for political power, a theme that was an all-important for Kuber Singh, whose Gurbilas is placed in 1751. Indeed, the contents of Kuber Singh's work make better sense in its context, a period earlier than the declaration of Sikh rule in 1765. The Rahitnama of Kesar Singh Chibbar and the Mehma Prakash of Sarup Das Palla cover all the Gurus and were composed in the early phase of Sikh rule, respectively in 1769 and 1776. Both try to highlight the close association of their ancestors with the Gurus. Some of these works treat all 10 human Gurus, along with the Guru Granth Sahib and the Khalsa, as a somewhat unified representation of the Sikh tradition. This builds on the Guru Granth Sahib itself, in which all the Gurus use the signature Nanak and are numbered as successive bodies inhabited by the same spirit. Similarly, the concept of the Khalsa collectively as the body of the Guru or Guru Panth is seen as complementing the spiritual message written down in the Guru Granth. Differences among these works arise in how caste is viewed, the status of Sikh leaders who were not among the 10 acknowledged Gurus, details of the first Khalsa initiation, and the manner of use of elements from Indic or Hindu mythology. The goddess in Sikh literature of the 18th century may be traced back to the 3 compositions on the exploits of Durga or Chandi, which came to be included in the Bachitr Natak Granth sometime in the late 1690s. The first 2 of these compositions, titled Chandi Charitra Yukt Bilas and Chandi Charitra II, are based on the Markandeya Puran and are in Braj. The third, Chandi Di Vaar, based on the Durga Saptsati, is in Punjabi. Other compositions of Guru Gobind Singh make clear that he believed in no deity other than Akal Purkh, the same concept of the divine as Guru Nanak. However, Durga was recalled for literary purposes at his court. There are 3 versions of this usage in 18th century, one in the Rahitnama of Chaupa Singh and the Bansavali Nama of Chibbar, a second in the Gurbilas of Kuber Singh and Sukha Singh, and a third presented by Sarup Das Palla in his Mehma Prakash. It appears that the episode of the goddess was incorporated in their works for their own narrative purposes. All 3 versions portray her heroic triumph over the demons who are destroyed by force of arms to protect the gods. The tale was meant to inspire people to fight for a righteous cause. Thus, a possibility was created in Sikh literature for the later association of the goddess with the institution of the Khalsa. Significantly, the writers who tend to bring in the goddess as a deity are also ones who advocate for a detailed Khalsa Rahat, way of life, from which the goddess is absent. More broadly, the earlier writings of the Sikh Gurus and those of the Bhagats and the Bards who are included in the Guru Granth Sahib also include occasional references to the mythological figures from earlier South Asian texts, including the Vedas and the Puranas. There can be debates as to the implications of these references for how the Sikh tradition is to be viewed in the context of South Asian religion, using that term in an expansive sense, both geographically and temporally. However, the three 18th century literary examples that feature the goddess are variants of a single earlier narrative episode with little connection to the rest of the Sikh literature, including its overarching view of a single divine being. The word Rahit occurs in the compositions of Guru Nanak for a way of life that accords well with one's professed beliefs and values. Its echoes are heard in the compositions of his successors and Bhai Gurdas. As a compound of the Punjabi word Rahit, meaning the mode of living, and the Persian word Nama, or a written statement, the Rahitnama is a manual that lays down norms for the Sikh way of life in accordance with the principles of Sikhism. This genre also emerges in the early 18th century, although with late 17th century precursors. 8 Rahitnamas are now placed in the 18th century, and they are both in prose and verse. The Rahitnamas present not merely a code of conduct, but also the Sikh way of life, embracing the religious, social, and political life of the Khalsa. The new perspectives in which the most important Rahitnamas are now seen underline their importance as sources of the history of the Khalsa, viewed by the authors as the mainstream of Sikhi by the end of the 18th century. Over the course of the 18th century, Khalsa Sikhs went from being hunted as targets of total elimination to ruling much of Punjab. With these events as a backdrop, Sikh literature expanded to include martyrs and various Sikh leaders in the Shahid Bilas genre. Prominent among the martyrs is Bhai Mani Singh, an associate of Sikh Gurus from the time of Guru Har Rai, the 7th Guru, but best known for his leadership of the community after Guru Gobind Singh's passing. The Ustat, literally eulogy, is yet another genre of this period, written in praise of sacred places like the town of Amritsar, site of Harmandir Sahib, the premier institution of the Sikhs. The Sikh literature of the 18th century is in Braj, Punjabi, and Persian, and so it's not contained within the category Punjabi literature. However, it uses the Gurmukhi script in most cases. This literature is by the Sikhs and is addressed to the Sikhs. These writings largely aim at defining the Sikh way of life as enshrined in the Guru Granth Sahib, narrating the history of the community with a particular focus on the lives of the Sikh Gurus, especially Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind Singh, as well as the struggles and triumphs of the Khalsa. In this construction of Sikh history, emphasis is also laid on Sikh sacred sites associated with the Sikh Gurus, their families, and the martyrs. This literature can be seen as aiming to give meaning to the community's existence, much as the 18th and 19th century nations were built on narratives of shared purpose and destiny. Going back before the 18th century, the construction of identity in the Guru Granth Sahib is through the delineation of what it means to be a Sikh of the Guru. Bhai Gurdas, writing in the early 17th century, is more explicit, describing the community by who its members are, how they act, how they are different from Hindus and Muslims, and the supreme role of the Sikh Gurus in binding and guiding the community. These efforts continued more explicitly in the 18th century, encompassing the meaning and role of the Khalsa, albeit with individual variations. With rare exceptions, 18th century Sikh literature is not canonical, but there is considerable consistency of content and purpose, reflecting a project of ensuring a vibrant Panth, meeting contemporary challenges while attempting to stay true to the message of the Sikh Gurus. Sikh understandings of their tradition are largely shaped by the content of the Guru Granth Sahib, other canonical writings, and narratives of the lives of the Gurus, typically used as vehicles for imparting the message of the Guru, providing inspiration as well as moral and ethical guidance. These goals find a relative profusion of literary expression in the 18th century as the project of self-definition becomes more urgent in a world of threats to the Sikh community's existence. This literary project continues throughout the 19th century, both before colonial rule and in its shadow. The 18th century literary production thus represents an important bridge from the period of the Sikh Gurus to the present. Arguably, Sikh literature of the 18th century does not offer the same range of poetic expression and lyricism that one can find in the Guru Granth Sahib, but the moral and ethical messages of that text and the promises of salvation therein are still at heart of the later non-canonical literature. Despite differences of detail, the works in all literary forms collectively reveal a central concern with the 10 Gurus, especially Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind Singh. The Khalsa and the Rahit of the Khalsa are almost equally important in these works. Compared to the time when the Adi Granth was compiled, in 1604, by the 18th century, there is much more history to be recorded and interpreted, and the preoccupations of this literature are how to act righteously in an often hostile environment. It is a commonplace observation that all texts are subject to interpretation, and variations in accounts of Sikh tradition among the 18th century authors reflect their own subjectivities, including their individual experiences and readings of earlier texts. These variations are certainly of interest, but so is the existence of a conceptual core in 18th century Sikh literature, which has carried over into present understandings of the Sikh experience.